Okay, so imagine this. You're a kid, right? But your playground. It's not swings and slides, it's like a whole field of these like old weathered headstones.
Wow. That's a bit different.
And instead of bedtime stories from mom and dad, you're getting whispers from people who lived like centuries ago. And get this, your best friends can walk through walls.
Okay, now that's just cool.
I know, right? That's the world Neil Gaiman creates in the Graveyard Book. It's so wild.
Yeah, it's definitely a new spin on that whole kid raised by, something other than humans thing.
Totally. But instead of a jungle, like in the Jungle Book, Bod's home is, well, a graveyard.
And his family.
Ghosts. It's like instead of Baloo the bear, you have like a centuries-old spirit teaching him about life.
And death, probably. I mean, it is a graveyard.
Oh, for sure. And the book's not just like spooky or anything. There's mystery because we don't know why Bod's family was murdered, and then there's all this fantasy stuff with the ghosts and their powers.
Plus adventures, like inside and outside the graveyard, I bet.
Definitely. And honestly, some really heartwarming moments too.
So where are we going with this deep dive then?
Well, we're going to unpack it all. The characters, the big events in the story, and the themes that, kind of make you think even after you finish reading.
Sounds like a plan. Let's start with the residents, I guess you could call them, of the graveyard.
Right. It's a whole community raising this kid.
So who are the main players in all this?
Well, first, there's Nobody Owens, but everyone calls him Bod. He's the living heartbeat of this place.
But how did he end up in a graveyard?
So he's just a baby, like barely a year old, when this guy, the man Jack, kills his whole family. But Bod, somehow he crawls away and ends up in the graveyard. The ghosts, they see him and decide to protect him.
That's pretty remarkable. They just, adopted a human baby?
It's wild, right? But it's also, like, really sweet. Like, they see this tiny, helpless kid, and they're like, nope, not today, murderer.
So what's Bod like? I mean, growing up in a graveyard, that's got to be different.
He's actually a pretty normal kid, all things considered. Curious, brave, smart. But he also develops these, like, ghost skills.
Those skills.
Yeah, like, he can fade, which basically makes him invisible, as long as nobody's really looking for him.
Handy.
Right. And he can haunt. You know that feeling when you think someone's watching you and you get the chills?
Oh, yeah, totally.
That's haunting. And then there's dream walking. He can, like, enter people's dreams.
Oh, hold on. Now that's some serious ghost skill right there.
For sure. So then there's Bod's adoptive parents, Mr. and Mrs. Owens. They're ghosts, obviously.
Obviously.
But they're like the best ghost parents ever. Mrs. Owens, she's so warm and caring, like a real mom. Mr. Owens is super supportive too.
So they're like the typical mom and dad, just, dead.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And they give Bod this amazing gift, the freedom of the graveyard. Basically, he can walk through anything inside the graveyard. Walls, tombs, anything.
So like his own personal ghost superpower.
Exactly. But Bod also has a guardian, Silas, and this is where things get a little, mysterious.
How so?
Well, Silas, he's not really alive, but he's not really dead either. He's kind of in between.
Okay, interesting.
There are hints that he might be a vampire, He only comes out at night, and he can leave the graveyard to get Bod stuff.
So he's like the cool, mysterious uncle who always brings back the best souvenirs.
Haha, kind of. But he's also really protective of Bod. He teaches him about both the living and the dead worlds.
It sounds like Bod's got a pretty amazing support system, even if it is a bit unconventional.
He does. But there's also Scarlet. She's a living girl who befriends Bod when they're both kids. She's bright, brave, and their friendship is super important.
Why? What does she bring to the graveyard party?
Well, she's Bod's link to the outside world,
Yeah.
She gives him a glimpse of what life is like for normal kids, and later on, she helps him uncover some secrets about his family.
Oh, intrigue.
Right. There are other important residents, too, like Liza Hemstock. She's a ghost, but she was accused of witchcraft when she was alive, so she's buried in this, outcast part of the graveyard.
Oof. Judged even in death.
Yeah, it's sad. But Bod, he doesn't care about that stuff. He befriends her. Then there's Miss Lupescu. She's a werewolf. Or a hound of God, depending on who you ask.
Okay, wait. Werewolves. Now we're talking.
I know, right? She fills in as Bod's guardian when Silas is away. And she's tough. Really tough. She teaches Bod all these survival skills, which he's not always thrilled about.
So like the drill sergeant of the graveyard.
Exactly.
But you mentioned a murderer earlier.
Right. The man, Jack, he's the one who killed Bod's family. And he's still out there hunting Bod. He's like the big bad of the story.
So like Voldemort, but in a graveyard.
Haha, kind of. He's part of this ancient group called the Jacks of all Trades, which makes him even scarier. They've been doing bad stuff for a long time.
So we've got this incredible cast of characters. A living boy raised by ghosts, a vampire guardian, a werewolf teacher, a human best friend, and a creepy murderer on his trail.
It's a lot, right? But that's what makes the story so amazing.
Okay, so walk me through Bod's life. What are the key moments?
Well, it all starts with that night his family is killed. Baby Bod crawls into the graveyard. His mom's ghost begs the others to protect him, and they give him the freedom of the graveyard. Silas becomes his guardian, and that's how it all begins.
What a start to life.
Right. Then, Bod starts growing up in the graveyard. He learns to read and write, probably from some of the ghost scholars hanging around. But he also has these adventures with Scarlet. Like one time they find this old tomb guarded by a Sleer, this super creepy creature who protects treasures.
Sounds like a graveyard field trip.
Totally. But as Bod gets older, things get more challenging. Miss Lupescu, the werewolf, she really pushes him. He learns languages, self-defense, all sorts of stuff. He also has a run-in with the ghouls, these nasty creatures who want to drag him into their world.
Yikes. Even the graveyard has its bad parts, it seems.
For sure. Bod also gets close to Liza Hempstock, and he really wants to get her a headstone. This leads him out into the living world, where he realizes people can be pretty judgmental. He even tries going to a normal school for a bit, but he gets bullied because he's different.
Oh, that's rough.
Yeah. So he goes back to the graveyard. Then when he's about 14, Scarlet comes back to town. She gets friendly with this historian, Mr. J. Frost.
Uh-oh, I feel like this is going somewhere bad.
It is. They find out that Mr. Frost is actually the man Jack.
What?
Yep. And then Jack and his creepy crew, the Jacks of all trades, they chase Bod and Scarlet back into the graveyard. This is like the big showdown.
So what happens? How does Bod fight off a bunch of, professional killers?
Well, he uses all his skills. He fades to hide. He knows the graveyard better than anyone. And he even gets help from some of the more powerful ghosts.
Oh, it's intense.
It is. The final fight is with Jack himself, and it happens in the Sleer's lair. Bod tricks Jack into thinking he controls the Sleer, and the Sleer, well, let's just say Jack doesn't come out of that one.
Wow.
Yeah. After that, Silas helps Scarlet forget everything so she can go back to living a normal life.
Smart move. Some things are better left buried. Right.
Literally. But then, as Bod gets older, he starts losing his ghost powers. He can't fade as well. He can't see the ghosts as clearly.
But he's growing out of his graveyard powers.
Exactly. Silas realizes this and gives Bod some money and a passport. He tells him it's time to leave the graveyard and live in the real world.
That must have been so hard.
It was a really bittersweet goodbye. Bod says farewell to everyone, and then he walks out of the graveyard, ready to start his new life.
And with that, he becomes just Bod Owens, a regular guy.
In a way, yeah. But his experiences in the graveyard, they'll always be a part of him.
Absolutely. So what are the big takeaways from all this? What is Gaiman trying to tell us?
Well, first, family. It's not always about blood, right? Bod's family is this whole community of ghosts who love and support him. It makes you think about what really makes a family.
It's about the connections we make, right? The
Yeah.
people who are there for us no matter what.
Exactly. Then there's growing up. The Graveyard Book is really a story about Bod growing from a baby to a young man. He learns, he makes friends, he faces challenges, and he eventually becomes independent.
And that whole graveyard setting. It's got to make you think about life and death differently, right?
Oh, totally. For Bod, death isn't this scary, unknown thing. It's just a part of life. There's even a chapter where the living and the dead have a party together.
Sounds like my kind of party.
Right. It makes you think about death in a less, terrifying way.
So death isn't an ending, but just another part of the whole cycle.
Yeah, kind of. There's also that classic good versus evil theme. Bod's the good guy, obviously, and the man Jack is pure evil. But then you have characters like Silas, who's kind of in between, and Liza Hempstock, who is judged unfairly. It shows that things aren't always black and white.
Sometimes the good guys have shadows, and the bad guys have, well, maybe not good sides, but more complicated ones.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then there's Bod's identity. His name is literally Nobody Owens. He's not really alive, but he's not dead either. He spends the whole book figuring out who he is and where he belongs.
And in the end, he embraces it all.
Right, he does. He accepts his unique identity and goes out into the world as himself.
That's a powerful message for anyone, really.
Totally. So, if you liked the Graveyard Book, you might also enjoy the Jungle Book. It's got that same vibe of a kid being raised by non-humans. And there are tons of books about orphans and unconventional families.
It's like a whole genre unto itself.
Right. And if you're into fantasy, there are so many great books out there for middle grade readers that deal with coming of age and supernatural stuff.
Speaking of which, let's talk about the man behind the graveyard, Neil Gaiman.
Oh, he's amazing. He's won tons of awards, and he's written so many different things: novels, comics, graphic novels, short stories, even screenplays. You might know Coraline or The Ocean at the End of the Lane.
Oh, Coraline. I loved that book. So creepy.
Right, that's his style. He mixes spooky stuff with deep themes and creates these worlds that feel real even though they're full of magic and
He's
monsters.
like the master of the macabre, but with heart.
Totally. So, to wrap up, The Graveyard Book is a really special story. It's about family, growing up, life and death, and finding yourself, all set in a graveyard, which is pretty cool.
Gaiman just knows how to make you think and feel, all while keeping you entertained.
He does, and that's what makes his book so great. So, think about this. If Bod grew up in a graveyard and learned all those lessons about life and death, how do you think our own surroundings shape how we see the world? Like, what if we all grew up somewhere totally different? How would that change us?
Mind blown. That's something I'm definitely going to be pondering for a while.
Me too.